It started with a knock at the door and a warning from a neighbor I barely knew. "They're building on your land," he said. I laughed at first. Then I saw the bulldozers. By the time I unrolled my grandfather's old map, half the woods were gone. What I uncovered next would tear open decades of lies, buried deeds, and a truth powerful enough to bring down an entire community built on stolen ground. And all of it started with a single line in the dirt. They say life comes at you fast, but grief comes quiet, like a cold wind through an open screen door. That's how it felt when Margaret Maggie Tillman buried her father under the oak trees at Chestnut Hill. 62 years old, newly retired, and just settling into what folks call a slow lane. Maggie figured her battles were mostly behind her, until she got the letter. No return address. Just her name in tight, blocky handwriting that looked familiar. Inside, a brittle envelope, yellowed with time. A photocopy of an old land deed, Tillman Joseph, her father's name, and a note written in that unmistakable, shaky script she remembered from his last years. They never took what mattered most. Find the old boundary. Maggie stared at the note for what felt like hours. What did he mean? What boundary? And what exactly had they tried to take? Her father was a man of few words but deep wells. Served in Korea. Raised her alone after her mother passed when Maggie was just 12. He never left Chestnut Hill, not even once. Said the soil there had his story buried in it. But now it seemed there was a chapter she'd never read. Maggie hadn't walked the land in years. Not really. Sure, she'd come back for holidays, help mow in the summers when her dad's knees got bad. But after he moved into assisted care, the house sat mostly empty. Just dust, memories, and broken porch steps. The place still smelled like tobacco and oil soap. She spent 3 days sorting his things, expecting the usual: wrenches, faded receipts, tin coffee can full of screws and memories. But in the back corner of his work shed, tucked inside a rusted cabinet behind a stack of fishing gear, she found it, a drawer with a false bottom. Inside, rolled up maps, hand-drawn surveys. Some dated back to 1942, with notations in her grandfather's elegant script. But the real shocker? The property lines. They were wrong. At least, compared to what the county records currently said. The Tillman land, what she'd always believed was about 60 acres, actually stretched deep into the ridgeline. Another 80 acres of forest, wetlands, and creeks. Land that today wasn't empty at all. She pulled it up on her phone. Google Maps. Her stomach turned. That stretch of land now showed as Golden Hollow Estates, a luxury retirement village. Gated, manicured lawns, golf carts, and shuffleboard courts. It was practically a resort, built right in the middle of her family's dirt. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She sat on the front porch with her father's maps and the letter in her lap. The crickets chirped, same as always. But now the air felt different. He'd known and left her this trail of breadcrumbs. Maybe he hadn't fought them, but maybe he wanted her to. The next morning, she called her cousin Jed, retired surveyor, still lived down in Hazard County. Jed showed up with biscuits, a thermos of black coffee, an eyebrow raised so high it nearly touched his cap. "You sure about this?" he asked, spreading the maps out across the hood of his truck. "These are old. Pre-GPS, might just be off by a hair." Maggie handed him a satellite printout and crossed her arms. "Then explain this." Jed pulled out his laser level, a topo app, and within an hour he was whistling low and shaking his head. "This ain't just a little mistake. This is deliberate. Somebody shifted markers. You see the stake here? It's about 200 yards east of where it should be. You don't do that by accident. They found 5 more just like it. Boundary lines redrawn. Forest quietly annexed, and nobody the wiser. But who would have had the power to change official county records?" Jed looked at her, serious now. "You know this wasn't just some developer screw-up, Mags. This was planned, papered over. Somebody made damn sure no one would notice." That night, Maggie went to the Golden Hollow website. Their slogan? Luxury living rooted in history. The irony nearly choked her. They were selling her grandfather's woods. paving over her family's footprints to make way for fire pits and pickleball. But why hadn't her father done anything? The next afternoon, Maggie took a walk up the ridge and stopped by the old Caldwell place. Bernice Caldwell, now 88, sharp as ever, was shelling peas on her porch, same as she had for decades. "Maggie Tillman," she said with a soft smile. "You came home after all." They talked for a while, shared memories, drank lemonade. Maggie finally pulled out one of the maps and placed it gently on Bernice's lap. "Do you remember any of this?" Bernice looked it over with slow, careful eyes. Then her hand stilled. "I do. I surely do." She leaned back and looked out across the trees. "It was the year your daddy had his second heart attack. In the VA hospital for weeks. That's when they came." "Who?" Maggie asked. "Men in suits. Not local. They drove up in black Lincolns. Real fancy. Asked a lot of questions. Had clipboards and boots too clean for these parts. They poked around up near the old creek bed. Couple days later, new stakes went up. Didn't think much of it at the time." Bernice turned to her, with eyes like storm clouds. "But your father, he came home and near lost his mind. Said someone been messing with the bones of the land. Said it wasn't worth the fight. Told me, if I stir this pot, Maggie won't inherit anything but trouble. So he let it be." Maggie felt her throat tighten. He'd given up the land to protect her. The next morning, Maggie called the county clerk's office and asked for everything they had on parcel #112 and the adjacent lots that now made up Golden Hollow Estates. 2 hours later, a skinny intern named Kevin emailed her a file labeled Historical Transfers and Zoning. It was over 200 pages long. She printed every sheet and sat at the kitchen table, just like her father had every morning with the paper and a cup of Sanka. Buried in the legal jargon, in an amendment dated 1989, she found it, a clause highlighted in yellow. If any fraudulent surveying or forged boundary certifications are discovered, rightful claimants may pursue reversion of title within 60 days of discovery. It was a time bomb. She checked the calendar. She'd first seen the map 4 days ago. That meant 56 days left. That same afternoon, she drove to the county assessor's office. The clerk on duty, a nervous young man with a tie too tight and glasses too big, gave her a long look. "Maggie Tillman?" he asked after checking her ID. "Yes." "We've been expecting you." That's when Maggie knew this wasn't going to be a simple correction. It was war. Golden Hollow looked like something out of a brochure. Fresh paint, landscape lawns, a private lake. But Maggie could smell the rot beneath the roses. Clint Barron, HOA president, greeted her at the gate with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tall, square-jawed, tanned like he had something to prove. A man who wore his sunglasses, even in the shade. "Miss Tillman," he said, not offering his hand. "You're trespassing. This is private property." "I own this land," she said, lifting the rolled-up deed and maps from her satchel. "No, ma'am. That was settled years ago." His tone sharpened. "If you continue to harass my residents, I'll be forced to take legal action." That same day, the sheriff showed up at Maggie's gate. A notice of civil trespass was duct-taped to her fence post. The next morning, her internet was cut. Then her mailbox was torn from the ground. Then came the fines. $600 for unauthorized land entry. $1,200 for defacing protected HOA boundary markers. She hadn't touched a thing. It was intimidation, plain and simple. A soft war, waged with paperwork and threats. Maggie looked around her father's empty house. No internet, no phone, just the hum of the refrigerator and the hiss of summer wind through cracked windows. She poured herself a cup of stale coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and whispered out loud, "You picked the wrong woman to scare off." That night, flashlight in hand and boots laced tight, Maggie hiked into the woods. She followed the creek just like she used to as a girl. The path was overgrown, but her feet remembered it. The way roots twisted under moss, the sound of frogs at the edge of a still pool, the scent of honeysuckle and pine. And then she found it, half buried under mud and leaf rot. A stone marker, cracked but unmistakable. carved into it were the initials JD, Joseph Tillman, her father, his father before him, and just beside it, an iron stake, so new it still smelled like metal. They'd tried to bury her family's truth, but the land remembered. As dawn broke, she climbed the ridge and looked down at Golden Hollow. Below her, million-dollar homes built on lies. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos of everything. Markers, streams, endangered wild orchids she'd remembered from childhood, wetlands. Maggie didn't have power, didn't have money, but she had something Clint Barron didn't. The land was telling her story, and now it was time the world heard it. Maggie filed her petition at the county courthouse the next morning. 56 days left. The clerk took the papers with a weak smile and told her a court date would be set as soon as possible. 3 weeks passed. Nothing. No date. No update. No return calls. She finally stormed into the clerk's office and demanded answers. The clerk blinked twice and whispered, "Off the record? Judge Harmon's brother lives in Golden Hollow. Friends with Barron. Golf every Sunday." Of course. The system was clogged with favors and fear. Maggie left in a fury. The next morning, she found her father's shed scorched black, burned in the night. Fire department said it was faulty wiring. She knew better. She nearly gave up. Sitting on the steps of that charred-out shed, staring at the ashes of everything her father had left her, she felt the old world crumbling. But fate still had something left in its pocket. While cleaning out what remained, she found a dusty shoebox tucked behind the fire safe. Inside, an old tape recorder. She pressed play and heard his voice. "Maggie, if you're hearing this, then maybe you found what I couldn't protect. I'm sorry I didn't fight. I was scared. Scared of losing everything. I didn't think anyone would believe an old man with a heart condition. But maybe you're stronger than I ever was." She clutched the recorder to her chest. She wouldn't stop. Not now. News had started to spread. Quietly at first. A whisper here, a shared article there. Local radio picked it up. A family fight over boundaries. David versus Goliath, but with deeds and dirt instead of slings and stones. That's when Gerald Fisher showed up on Maggie's porch. Tall, gaunt, wearing a suit that didn't fit quite right. Former HOA treasurer, pale as a ghost and smelling faintly of antiseptic. "I'm dying," he said plainly. "Cancer. Stage 4. And I need to make peace with something." He handed her a binder. Thick, worn, labeled Financials 2016 to 2024. Inside, smoking guns. Over $200,000 in unexplained payments. Shell companies. Consulting fees paid to Barron's cousin. Backdoor zoning bribes. Forged documents. Gerald's voice was soft, like it hurt to speak. I didn't know at first, but when I found out, I was too scared. Everyone who questioned Clint got pushed out, fired, harassed. Some of them just left. But I can't leave this world knowing I stood by while your family got robbed. She looked him in the eyes, her throat tight. "You sure you want this public?" "I'm sure," he said. "I want my grandkids to know I didn't die a coward." The town meeting was packed. Every folding chair filled. The back wall lined with standing neighbors. Local press had shown up. 2 radio stations. 1 cable reporter. Word had spread like wildfire. Maggie walked in front of the room, a box of documents in hand, her father's tape recorder in her bag. She looked out at the crowd. Familiar faces, old friends, strangers, and Clint Barron, seated near the front, smirking. Maggie began. She laid out the surveys, the forged deeds, the whistleblower testimony. She played her father's message. She described the stone marker in the woods, the endangered orchids, the wetlands illegally bulldozed. Then she dropped the hammer. 20 homes in Golden Hollow, including the clubhouse, were built on stolen land. You didn't just cheat my family. You cheated every one of your residents. Gasps, murmurs, then fury. One woman stood up, arms crossed, voice shaking. "You fined me $800 for a garden gnome." Another, "You cut off my water because my grass wasn't green enough." Another. You said my Alzheimer's husband couldn't sit outside without a shirt. You humiliated us. The room turned. By night's end, a new HOA was voted in. Clint was escorted out in handcuffs. Fraud, arson, bribery, federal environmental violations. And Maggie? She didn't gloat. She just walked outside, sat on the courthouse steps, and looked up at the stars. Her hands still trembled. Her voice was raw. But she had done it. She had honored her father. She had saved the land. She had proved, once and for all, that sometimes the old lines in the dirt still mean something. Months passed. The illegal development was halted. No one lost their home, thanks to Maggie's insistence. The wetlands were declared protected. The state stepped in and turned the area into a conservation easement. And the Tillman homestead? Maggie turned it into a community center. Kids came to learn about ecology. Veterans met every Tuesday night to swap stories and play cards. There was always coffee, always stories. On the cabin door, a simple plaque read, Tillman's legacy, the land remembers. Maggie wasn't a hero. She'd tell you that herself. She was just a woman with dirt under her nails, a father's voice in her heart, and enough stubborn grit to outlast a storm. But in a world full of fences, forgeries, and folks willing to sell history for a swimming pool, she drew a line in the dirt, and she didn't back down.